Hello and welcome to Module 3. You also have to complete Module 4 at the same time that you're doing this module. So there's a lot of material in these two modules, so I just kind of want to warn you to be prepared for that. But this is also one of the last weeks. There's only 3 weeks where we do it this way, and this is the second one. So it's kind of nice to get those out of the way early. And so I'm just sort of making note of the fact that early on we'll be combining these modules, but that won't be every week that we do that. As for this module, it is about classifying arguments. Essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to not just look at sort of how you take apart and classify all the parts of an argument. What type of argument is it? How do we judge the inferential claim? How do we judge the factual claim? How do we judge each of the parts? First off, what it does is it says not everything that you encounter is an argument. Some things are just loosely associated statements. Some of them are really more explanations or really more directions or things like that. They're not technically arguments in the sense that they're actually trying to use premises or statements to support a conclusion and prove something. Instead, they're just something else. They're just loosely associated statements or explanations, something like that. So what we do is we determine what is an argument to begin with. Then we begin to break down our arguments into two types. They're either deductive or they're inductive. Deductive means that the argument follows from the premises necessarily. That means that if the premises are true, the conclusion absolutely has to be true. Inductive, on the other hand, is saying that if the premises are true, the conclusion is likely true. And so one is saying with certainty and the other is saying with likelihood. Now, both are good types of arguments. Both are, great. It's just a different style or different type. Deductive arguments typically are definition-based because you can follow if this meets the definition, then it follows necessarily. Inductive arguments oftentimes are more focused on observation, predictions, other things, whereas they can be very strong, they can be very likely, but they're not certain. You could have a class, like a class where, every week the professor lets you out 15 minutes early, a night class, and every night lets you out exactly 15 minutes early. And on week 15, you arrive at class, you say, I bet we get out 15 minutes early. Out of 16 weeks, because, you've been let out 15 minutes early every single class, the first 14, so it would be likely you would the next 2. But this is still only a likely true argument. It's possible that the professor could say, I'm going to go over tonight. Tonight, I got them out early. Maybe the professor got his watch fixed, or, something like that. Who knows? But it's not 100% certain. But that kind of track record would make it highly, highly likely. And that's sort of what makes that the case. Deductive arguments, on the other hand, are usually categorical. They're things like all dogs are canines, Fido is a dog, therefore Fido is a canine. If the premises are true, it follows necessarily. After you divide things into deductive and inductive, you then begin to look at two factors, the inferential claim and the factual claim. Every argument makes those two claims. The inferential claim is, does this actually prove what I want it to prove? And the factual claim is whether or not the premises are true or not. The reality is that you can have an argument that's structured in such a way that it proves what it purports to prove, but all of its premises are false. You could argue for, all kinds of things. Oftentimes it's like, well, if what you're telling me is true, then I think you've convinced me, only to come to find out that what the person's been telling you isn't true. And that's the factual claim. And so what we do in logic is we break that away from the inferential claim, which is basically a claim on how strong the argument is in and of itself, like whether or not the premises are working together, whether or not they're structured in a way that works. In deductive arguments, you could have them either valid or invalid, and that means that that a valid one would be one in which it actually works. Invalid means they have been structured in a way that appear as if the premises or the conclusion follows necessarily from the premises, but that's misleading. Inductive arguments, you can have what we call a difference between strong and weak, and that's where if it's strong, it means the conclusion is likely true, and if it's weak, it means the likelihood is not that strong, it's very weak, and that's all that's doing. So what we do is we determine what is an argument and what is not. We then determine if it's deductive or inductive. We then determine if it has an inferential claim that works or not. And then we look to see if the statements, the premises, are true or false. And that's how we kind of break arguments apart, take them apart. And by doing that, we can begin to examine them and get a better understanding of how well somebody's actually proving the point that they are trying to make.